Waters off Jupiter, Florida, had earned a reputation as one of the premier shark diving destinations along the Atlantic coast. In 2019, the area attracted thousands of thrill-seekers and marine enthusiasts eager to experience close encounters with various shark species in their natural habitat. Jupiter's unique geography, where the Gulf Stream runs close to shore, created an ideal environment for bull sharks, tiger sharks, and occasionally great whites to hunt and feed year-round. Local dive operators had been conducting cage diving expeditions in these waters for over 15 years, developing what they considered foolproof safety protocols. The cages were constructed from heavy-duty steel bars spaced precisely to prevent sharks from entering while allowing divers clear visibility and photographic opportunities. Ocean Apex Expeditions, the most established operator in the area, had maintained a spotless safety record since its founding, with over 10,000 successful dives completed without serious incident. The Gulf Stream's proximity to Jupiter's coastline created a natural highway for migrating marine life, bringing bait fish, sea turtles, and the predators that followed them. Bull sharks, known for their aggressive temperament and powerful bite force, were particularly common in these waters during late spring and early summer. Unlike other shark species that preferred deeper offshore waters, bull sharks frequently ventured into shallower areas, making them ideal subjects for cage diving operations. Laura Mitchell, a 34-year-old marine photography enthusiast from Denver, had booked her cage diving experience months in advance. She had been documenting marine life for nearly a decade, traveling to destinations around the world to capture underwater images for her growing portfolio. This would be her first shark cage dive, and she had spent weeks researching techniques for photographing large predators in low-visibility conditions. The dive boat departed Jupiter Inlet at dawn on a calm Tuesday morning in June. Captain Rick Santana, who had been operating shark tours for 12 years, briefed the 6 divers aboard about safety procedures and what to expect during their encounter. Laura listened intently as he explained how the chum would be deployed to attract sharks, how divers should position themselves within the cage, and the importance of keeping all body parts inside the protective barriers at all times. The boat anchored in 90 feet of water, approximately 3 miles offshore, where the captain had experienced consistent shark activity throughout the previous week. The crew began preparing the chum mixture of fish blood, oil, and chopped bait, while setting up the diving platform and lowering the cage into position. Laura donned her wetsuit and checked her underwater camera equipment, excitement building as she watched the first sharks appear in the distance. Within 30 minutes of beginning the chum deployment, several bull sharks had arrived to investigate the scent trail. The largest specimen measured nearly 8 feet in length and displayed the characteristic broad head and stocky build that made bull sharks so formidable. Laura entered the cage with 2 other divers, positioning herself near the bottom bars to capture upward-angled shots of the sharks silhouetted against the surface light. The bull sharks circled the cage methodically, occasionally approaching close enough for Laura to photograph their scarred hides and powerful jaw structures. She adjusted her position frequently to capture different angles, carefully maintaining her grip on the cage bars while maneuvering her camera equipment. The water visibility was excellent that morning, allowing for clear shots of the sharks' distinctive features and hunting behaviors. During her 4th dive rotation, Laura shifted her position to photograph a particularly large bull shark approaching from below. As she moved to get a better angle, her left leg inadvertently extended beyond the lower cage bars. The positioning was subtle, with her calf protruding only inches outside the protective barrier, but it was enough to trigger an immediate response from the circling predator. The bull shark struck with explosive speed, its jaws clamping down on Laura's lower leg just above the ankle. The force of the bite was tremendous, easily penetrating her thick neoprene wetsuit and crushing down on the muscle and bone beneath. Laura screamed into her regulator as the shark thrashed once, its powerful neck muscles generating enough force to potentially drag her from the cage entirely. The attack lasted only seconds, but the damage was severe and immediate. Blood poured from the puncture wounds as the shark released its grip and disappeared into the murky water below. Laura's fellow divers and the dive master reacted instantly, grabbing her arms and pulling her toward the surface while applying pressure to the bleeding wounds. Captain Santana and his crew had emergency medical supplies ready on deck, including a tourniquet specifically designed for shark bite injuries. They applied direct pressure to Laura's wounds while radioing the Coast Guard for immediate medical evacuation. The boat's engines roared to life as they began the high-speed run back to Jupiter Inlet, where an ambulance was already waiting at the marina. Laura remained conscious throughout the ordeal, though she was clearly in shock from both the attack and the rapid blood loss. The dive master, who was also a certified EMT, monitored her vital signs while maintaining pressure on the wounds. The tourniquet had effectively stopped the major bleeding, but Laura would require immediate surgery to repair the extensive tissue damage and assess potential bone fractures. At the trauma center, emergency room doctors worked for over 4 hours to clean and suture Laura's wounds, remove shark tooth fragments, and repair damaged muscle tissue. She required 3 separate surgeries over the following week to address complications from the deep puncture wounds and to reconstruct torn ligaments in her ankle. Marine biologists who investigated the incident concluded that the shark's behavior was likely triggered by the combination of feeding stimulation from the chum and Laura's leg extending beyond the cage protection. Bull sharks, they noted, were particularly aggressive feeders and less discriminating than other species when identifying potential prey items. Laura eventually made a full recovery, though she required 6 months of physical therapy to regain full mobility in her injured leg. She continued her marine photography career, but never returned to cage diving, instead focusing on less dangerous methods of documenting ocean life. Ocean Apex expeditions implemented additional safety measures, including more frequent safety briefings and modified cage designs with smaller bar spacing. The incident served as a reminder that even experienced dive operators and safety-conscious participants could not completely eliminate the risks inherent in close encounters with apex predators in their natural environment. Réunion Island, a French overseas territory located in the Indian Ocean east of Madagascar, had gained international attention in 2021 for both its stunning natural beauty and its unusually high concentration of shark attacks. The island's unique geography, featuring dramatic volcanic coastlines and deep offshore waters, created ideal conditions for large pelagic predators, including tiger sharks, bull sharks, and occasional great whites. The western coast of Réunion featured several protected lagoons where jet skiing and other motorized water sports were still permitted under strict safety guidelines. These areas were regularly patrolled by marine safety officers and monitored by aerial surveillance, but the vastness of the ocean made complete protection impossible. Lucas Marin, a 29-year-old construction foreman from Saint-Denis, had purchased his jet ski specifically for weekend recreation in Réunion's beautiful lagoons. He had been riding for nearly 3 years without incident and was familiar with local safety protocols and shark awareness procedures. Lucas typically stayed within designated recreational zones and avoided areas where fishing boats operated or where shark sightings had been reported. On a warm Saturday morning in September 2021, Lucas launched his jet ski from the marina at Saint-Gilles-les-Bains, planning to explore the protected waters of the Western Lagoon. The conditions were perfect for riding, with calm seas, excellent visibility, and light winds that created minimal chop on the water's surface. Several other jet skiers and small boats were already enjoying the morning, and marine patrol officers were conducting their regular safety rounds. Lucas had been riding for approximately 40 minutes, staying well within the designated recreational boundaries, when his jet ski's engine began sputtering and losing power. He had experienced minor mechanical issues before and was confident he could troubleshoot the problem. So he guided the machine toward a quiet section of the lagoon away from other water traffic. The engine died completely as Lucas reached a shallow area near the reef edge, leaving him stranded roughly half a mile from shore. He attempted to restart the motor several times without success, noting that the engine was getting fuel, but failing to maintain compression. Lucas radioed the marina on his emergency channel to report his location and request assistance, receiving confirmation that a rescue boat would be dispatched within 15 minutes. While waiting for help to arrive, Lucas decided to cool off in the warm lagoon water. The temperature was approaching 90 degrees, and his wetsuit was becoming uncomfortably hot in the tropical sun. He had performed this routine countless times before, using the brief swim as an opportunity to check his jet ski's hull for damage or debris that might have caused the engine failure. Lucas slipped into the crystal-clear water, immediately enjoying the relief from the heat as he floated alongside his disabled jet ski. He could see the sandy bottom clearly through 20 feet of water and noticed several small reef fish swimming nearby. The area appeared completely safe, with no signs of large marine life or unusual activity that might indicate danger. The tiger shark that attacked Lucas had been patrolling the lagoon's outer edges for several days, likely drawn by fish cleaning activities from nearby charter boats and the scent trails that drifted with the current. Tiger sharks were known for their curiosity and willingness to investigate unfamiliar objects, making them particularly dangerous to humans engaged in water activities. Without warning, the shark struck from below, its powerful jaws clamping down on Lucas's left calf with tremendous force. The attack was swift and decisive, with the predator's serrated teeth easily penetrating his wetsuit and crushing down on muscle and bone. Lucas screamed as the shark's bite sent shockwaves of pain through his entire leg, and he immediately began fighting back with desperate determination. The tiger shark measured approximately 12 feet in length and displayed the aggressive feeding behavior characteristic of its species. It maintained its grip on Lucas's leg while thrashing its powerful tail, attempting to drag him away from the jet ski and into deeper water where it could complete its attack without interference. Lucas fought back with everything he had, using his free leg to kick the shark repeatedly in its sensitive nose and eye area. His construction work had given him significant upper body strength, and he managed to grab the jet ski's handle while continuing to strike the predator with his fist and knee. The shark's grip began to loosen after nearly 30 seconds of sustained resistance. When the tiger shark finally released its hold, Lucas immediately hauled himself back onto the jet ski, despite the excruciating pain in his damaged leg. Blood poured from multiple puncture wounds where the shark's teeth had penetrated deep into his calf muscle, and he could see exposed bone through several of the larger tears in his wetsuit. Working through shock and blood loss, Lucas managed to activate his emergency flare, sending a bright red signal high into the clear morning sky. A fishing boat operating nearby saw the distress signal and immediately altered course toward his position, while the marine patrol vessel that had been dispatched earlier increased speed after receiving Lucas's urgent radio transmission. The fishing boat reached Lucas first, with its crew quickly recognizing the severity of his injuries and the immediate need for medical attention. They carefully transferred him aboard while applying makeshift bandages to control the bleeding, then began a high-speed run toward the harbor where ambulance services were already waiting. Lucas remained conscious throughout the rescue and transport, though he was clearly in severe shock from both the attack and the rapid blood loss. The fishing boat's captain, who had lived on Réunion his entire life and had witnessed several shark attacks, applied a tourniquet to Lucas's upper leg that probably saved his life by preventing him from bleeding out during the 20-minute trip to shore. At the island's main hospital, emergency surgeons worked for over 6 hours to clean and repair Lucas's wounds, remove fragments of shark teeth, and reconstruct damaged muscle tissue. The tiger shark's bite had caused significant trauma, but had missed major arteries and bones, allowing doctors to preserve full function of his leg with extensive rehabilitation. Lucas required multiple follow-up surgeries over the subsequent months to address complications from his injuries and to remove scar tissue that was limiting his mobility. Physical therapy continued for nearly a year before he regained full strength and range of motion in his damaged leg. Marine biologists investigating the attack noted that fish cleaning activities in the area had increased significantly over the previous weeks, likely attracting tiger sharks to hunt in the lagoon's normally safe waters. They recommended enhanced monitoring of fishing boat operations and stricter disposal protocols for fish waste. Lucas eventually returned to jet skiing, though he implemented additional safety measures, including never entering the water alone and carrying improved emergency communication equipment. His experience became part of local safety training programs designed to educate water sports enthusiasts about shark awareness and emergency response procedures. The incident reinforced Réunion Island's reputation as one of the world's most challenging locations for safe water recreation, while highlighting the ongoing need for vigilance and respect when sharing ocean spaces with apex predators. The waters off the Farallon Islands, located 30 miles west of San Francisco, had long been recognized as one of the world's premier great white shark research locations. In 2022, these nutrient-rich waters continued to attract marine biologists, documentary filmmakers, and wildlife photographers seeking to capture footage of apex predators in their natural hunting grounds. The area's unique ecosystem, centered around a massive colony of northern fur seals, created ideal conditions for great white sharks to congregate and feed. The Farallones, a chain of rocky outcroppings rising dramatically from the Pacific Ocean, supported one of the largest seal populations on the West Coast. During autumn months, the waters around these islands became a virtual feeding ground for great whites, with sharks ranging from juveniles to massive adults exceeding 20 feet in length regularly observed hunting in the area. A marine wildlife documentary company based in Monterey had secured permits to film a segment about great white shark feeding behavior for a major television network. The production required several days of filming from a specially modified research vessel equipped with underwater cameras, hydrophones, and safety equipment designed specifically for shark research operations. Jake Foster, a 31-year-old television producer from Los Angeles, was overseeing the production and ensuring that all safety protocols were followed while capturing the dramatic footage needed for their documentary. The crew included marine biologist Dr. Sarah Chen as the scientific advisor, along with experienced cameramen, sound technicians, and support staff who had worked on similar projects throughout the Pacific. The filming vessel, a converted research boat named Pacific Explorer, featured a low-profile filming platform that allowed cameras to be positioned just inches above the water's surface. This design enabled unprecedented close-up shots of sharks, but also placed crew members in closer proximity to the water than traditional research vessels. Safety equipment included shark cages, emergency medical supplies, and direct communication links with Coast Guard rescue services. On the third day of filming, conditions were perfect for shark encounters. The water visibility exceeded 60 feet, and seal activity around the islands had attracted numerous great whites to the area. The crew had already captured excellent footage of several smaller sharks, but they were hoping to film one of the area's legendary giant females that could exceed 18 feet in length. Dr. Chen had been tracking a particularly large female great white using acoustic monitoring equipment, and her signals indicated the shark was approaching their filming location. The crew prepared their cameras and took positions around the boat's filming platform, with Jake positioning himself near the stern to coordinate camera angles and ensure optimal lighting conditions. The great white that approached the Pacific Explorer was indeed massive, estimated at nearly 17 feet in length and weighing close to 3,000 pounds. She had been hunting in the area for several weeks and was likely attracted to the boat by the low-frequency vibrations created by the engines and generator systems. Great whites were known to investigate unfamiliar objects in their territory, often using their acute senses to determine whether something represented prey, threat, or simple curiosity. The shark's initial approach was typical of great white investigative behavior, involving slow circles at increasing proximity, while gathering sensory information about the vessel and its occupants. Camera operators captured stunning footage as the massive predator glided through the clear water just feet below the surface, her distinctive white underside and gray dorsal coloring clearly visible. What happened next surprised even the experienced crew members who had filmed sharks for years. Instead of maintaining her distance or moving away after investigating, the great white suddenly accelerated toward the boat's hull with tremendous force. The impact of her body striking the fiberglass hull created a loud thudding sound and caused the entire vessel to shudder. The shark's momentum carried her partially out of the water as she collided with the boat, her massive head and upper body briefly visible above the surface before she slid back down. However, rather than retreating after the impact, she immediately turned and approached the boat's edge, where the filming platform extended lowest to the water. Jake Foster, who had been leaning over the platform to monitor camera equipment, suddenly found himself face to face with the enormous predator as she rose from the water with her jaws partially open. The great white's head broke the surface just inches from the boat's edge, her black eyes clearly visible as she investigated this strange floating object that had invaded her territory. In a movement that lasted only seconds, but seemed like an eternity to those watching, the shark's jaws clamped down on the boat's edge directly adjacent to where Jake was positioned. Her massive teeth, some exceeding 2 inches in length, scraped against the fiberglass hull as she bit down with exploratory force rather than aggressive intent. Jake instinctively pulled back from the edge, but not before the shark's lower jaw made contact with his leg just above the ankle. The contact was brief and relatively gentle by great white standards, but the shark's razor-sharp teeth easily penetrated his wetsuit and drew blood from several shallow cuts on his calf and ankle. The shark maintained her grip on the boat's edge for nearly 10 seconds, her powerful jaw muscles easily supporting her massive weight as she hung partially suspended from the vessel. Crew members stood frozen in amazement and terror as the apex predator demonstrated the incredible strength that made great whites such formidable hunters. Dr. Chen later explained that the shark's behavior was consistent with investigative rather than predatory intent, noting that a true attack would have involved much more aggressive movements and sustained biting behavior. The shark appeared to be using her highly sensitive mouth to gather information about the boat's composition and potential threat level. When the great white finally released her grip and slid back into the water, she continued circling the boat for several more minutes before gradually moving away toward deeper water. The entire encounter had lasted less than 5 minutes, but it provided the crew with unprecedented footage of great white shark behavior and an unforgettable reminder of these animals' power and unpredictability. Jake's injuries were minor, consisting of several shallow cuts that required cleaning and bandaging but no medical evacuation. The crew returned to shore that afternoon, where Jake received proper medical treatment and the incident was reported to the marine safety authorities. The footage they captured became some of the most dramatic shark encounter videos ever recorded, demonstrating both the curiosity and potential danger of great white sharks in their natural environment. The waters off New Smyrna Beach, Florida, had long held the unofficial title of the shark bite capital of the world. Located along the Atlantic coast of Volusia County, this stretch of coastline recorded more shark encounters than any other location globally, with an average of 15 incidents annually. The area's unique geography created perfect conditions for both marine predators and water sports enthusiasts, with shallow sandbars, murky water, and abundant bait fish drawing bull sharks dangerously close to shore. On September 14, 2018, these factors would converge in a terrifying encounter that would forever change one windsurfer's relationship with the ocean. Maya Torres, a 32-year-old graphic designer from Orlando, had been windsurfing for over 8 years and considered herself an experienced rider. She had driven to New Smyrna Beach that afternoon specifically to take advantage of the strong offshore winds that had been forecast for the weekend. The conditions appeared ideal, with sustained winds of 18 knots and wave heights of 3 to 4 feet, providing the perfect combination for an exhilarating session. Torres had launched her equipment from the beach near the Ponce de Leon Inlet around 3:30 p.m., when the afternoon sun was still high enough to provide good visibility. Her bright yellow sail cut through the choppy waters as she tacked back and forth parallel to the shoreline, staying within the designated swimming and surfing zones where lifeguards maintained watch. The trouble began approximately 45 minutes into her session when Torres attempted to execute a particularly aggressive jibe in the increasingly gusty conditions. As she leaned into the turn, a sudden wind shift caught her sail at an awkward angle, causing her to lose balance and fall backward into the water. The boom swung violently across the board, and the sail lines became twisted around her right ankle and lower leg. Torres found herself in an extremely vulnerable position, floating in chest-deep water roughly 100 meters from shore, with her leg firmly entangled in the rigging. The more she struggled to free herself, the tighter the lines seemed to become, cutting into her skin and restricting blood flow to her foot. Her frantic movements created significant splashing and commotion in the water, sending vibrations through the surf that would prove to attract unwanted attention. Several beachgoers on the nearby fishing pier noticed Torres's predicament and began pointing in her direction, though none initially realized the severity of her situation. The lifeguards on duty were dealing with a separate incident involving a young swimmer who had been caught in a rip current further down the beach. Unknown to Torres, a large bull shark had been patrolling the area for the better part of an hour, drawn by the scent of bait fish that had been driven into the shallows by the incoming tide. Bull sharks were notorious for their aggressive nature and their unusual ability to tolerate both saltwater and freshwater environments, making them one of the most dangerous species in coastal waters. This particular specimen measured approximately 8 feet in length and weighed an estimated 300 pounds. The combination of Torres's erratic movements, the blood from the cuts on her ankle caused by the rigging lines, and the murky water conditions created what marine biologists would later describe as a perfect storm for a case of mistaken identity. The bull shark, operating primarily on instinct and sensory input, perceived the struggling windsurfer as a wounded animal in distress. The attack occurred with lightning speed and devastating force. Torres felt a massive impact against her lower right leg, followed immediately by excruciating pressure as the shark's powerful jaws clamped down on her calf muscle. The animal's teeth, designed for crushing through bone and cartilage, penetrated deeply into her flesh, causing severe lacerations and immediately compromising the structural integrity of her lower leg. Torres later described the sensation as being caught in a mechanical vice that was simultaneously crushing and shredding her leg. The shark maintained its grip for what felt like an eternity, but was likely only 8 to 10 seconds, during which time Torres could feel her leg bones flexing under the tremendous pressure. The predator's attack strategy appeared to involve a test bite rather than a feeding attempt, as bull sharks often investigate potential prey before committing to a full assault. After the initial bite, the shark released its grip and retreated several meters, leaving Torres floating in a rapidly expanding cloud of her own blood. Two fishermen on the nearby pier, Ricardo Menendez and Thomas Kellerman, had witnessed the entire attack and immediately abandoned their equipment to rush toward the water. Menendez, a former Navy rescue swimmer, dove into the surf without hesitation, while Kellerman called emergency services and alerted the lifeguards to the situation. Menendez reached Torres within 90 seconds of the attack and found her conscious but in severe shock, still partially entangled in her windsurfing equipment. Working quickly to free her from the rigging, he applied direct pressure to the wounds on her calf while helping her stay afloat. The shark had inflicted multiple puncture wounds and several deep lacerations, but had not severed any major arteries. Kellerman had waded into the water carrying a surfboard, which he used to help transport Torres back to shore while scanning the surrounding water for any sign of the shark's return. Several other beachgoers formed a human chain to assist in bringing Torres safely to the beach, where paramedics were already waiting with emergency medical equipment. The attack had lasted less than 15 seconds from initial contact to rescue, but the damage was substantial. Torres suffered severe muscle trauma, multiple puncture wounds, and significant blood loss, requiring immediate surgery to repair the damaged tissue and prevent infection. She spent 4 days in the hospital and underwent 3 months of physical therapy to regain full use of her leg. The incident prompted local authorities to temporarily close the beach to water sports activities and led to increased monitoring of bull shark populations in the area during peak activity periods. The Gulf of Mexico off the Louisiana coast has been home to hundreds of offshore oil drilling platforms since the 1940s, creating artificial reef systems that attract diverse marine life in the otherwise relatively barren deep-water environment. Located approximately 85 nautical miles southeast of Morgan City, the Deep Horizon, two platforms had been extracting crude oil from depths exceeding 5,000 feet since 2016. The massive structure, rising 200 feet above the ocean surface, had become an inadvertent habitat for various fish species, which in turn attracted larger predators, including tiger sharks. On August 22, 2021, this convergence of industrial activity and marine predators would result in a terrifying encounter that highlighted the hidden dangers faced by offshore workers. Mike Daniels, a 34-year-old maintenance technician from Baton Rouge, had been working on offshore rigs for over 9 years and was considered one of the most experienced crew members aboard the platform. His expertise in underwater welding and equipment maintenance made him invaluable for the complex repairs required to keep the drilling operation running smoothly. Daniels had completed hundreds of water-level maintenance tasks without incident, developing what he considered a healthy respect for the ocean environment surrounding the rig. The maintenance operation that morning involved cleaning and inspecting the platform's water intake filters, which had become clogged with debris and marine growth over the previous month. The task required Daniels to work from a floating maintenance platform positioned alongside the main structure, approximately 15 feet above the ocean surface. The job typically took 3 to 4 hours to complete and was considered routine maintenance that posed minimal risk to experienced personnel. Conditions that morning appeared ideal for the operation, with calm seas, light winds, and excellent visibility extending to a depth of nearly 30 feet. The water temperature registered 28 degrees Celsius, warm enough to make the work comfortable, but also creating optimal conditions for increased marine activity. Unknown to the crew, several large schools of Spanish mackerel and king mackerel had been feeding near the platform throughout the early morning hours, attracted by smaller baitfish that congregated around the structure's support pillars. The presence of these baitfish schools had been noticed by platform supervisor Carlos Mendoza during his routine morning inspection, but he considered them a normal occurrence that posed no threat to operations. What Mendoza could not have anticipated was that the feeding activity had also attracted a large female tiger shark, measuring approximately 12 feet in length and weighing an estimated pound 200 pounds. Tiger sharks are known for their opportunistic feeding behavior and their willingness to investigate unusual objects or disturbances in their territory. This particular specimen had been patrolling the area around the platform for several hours, drawn by the vibrations from the drilling equipment and the scent of fish oil and other organic materials that regularly leaked from the industrial operations. The accident occurred at approximately 10:45 a.m. when Daniels was positioning a heavy filter assembly using a hydraulic crane mounted on the floating platform. As he guided the equipment into position, a sudden mechanical failure caused the crane's support cable to snap, sending the 400-pound filter assembly plummeting toward the water. Daniels instinctively lunged forward to prevent the valuable equipment from sinking, but his safety harness became entangled with the falling machinery. The combined weight of Daniels and the filter assembly overwhelmed his safety line, causing him to plummet 15 feet into the Gulf waters with tremendous force. The impact stunned him momentarily, and he found himself struggling to stay afloat while still partially connected to the sinking equipment by his twisted safety harness. Fellow crew members Jimmy Rodriguez and Tony Castellanos witnessed the accident from the main platform and immediately began emergency rescue procedures. Rodriguez activated the man overboard alarm, while Castellanos prepared emergency diving equipment, though both men realized that immediate action was required to prevent Daniels from drowning. The commotion caused by Daniels's fall and his subsequent struggle to free himself from the equipment created significant splashing and vibration in the water, which immediately attracted the attention of the tiger shark that had been hunting nearby. The predator's acute sensory system detected the irregular movements and potential distress signals, triggering an investigative response. The attack came without warning as Daniels finally managed to cut himself free from the safety harness using his emergency knife. The massive tiger shark approached from below and behind, where Daniels could not see the approaching danger. The predator struck with devastating force, its powerful jaws clamping down on Daniels's right leg just below the knee. Tiger sharks possess some of the strongest bite forces in the ocean, capable of exerting pressure exceeding 3,000 pounds per square inch. The animal's teeth, designed for cutting through tough materials including turtle shells and whale bones, immediately penetrated through Daniels' heavy work boots and protective clothing, causing severe lacerations and crushing injuries to his lower leg. Rodriguez and Castellanos reacted immediately to their colleagues' screams for help, grabbing whatever tools were available to assist in the rescue attempt. Rodriguez threw a heavy wrench at the shark, while Castellanos lowered a rescue line toward the water. The impact of the wrench against the shark's head caused it to momentarily release its grip on Daniels' leg, providing a crucial opportunity for escape. Working together, the crew members managed to pull Daniels toward an emergency ladder mounted on the platform's support structure, while the tiger shark circled menacingly nearby. The predator made several additional approaches during the rescue operation, but was deterred by continued bombardment with tools and equipment thrown by crew members positioned on higher levels of the platform. The rescue operation lasted approximately 8 minutes from the initial attack to successfully extracting Daniels from the water. Emergency medical treatment was immediately administered by the platform's certified medical technician, who worked to control the severe bleeding from multiple puncture wounds and lacerations on Daniels's right leg and ankle. A Coast Guard helicopter was dispatched from New Orleans for emergency medical evacuation, arriving at the platform within 90 minutes of the initial distress call. Daniels remained conscious throughout the ordeal, though he had lost a significant amount of blood and was showing signs of shock and trauma from the attack. The incident prompted an immediate review and revision of safety protocols for all water-level maintenance operations, including the installation of shark deterrent devices and enhanced emergency response equipment on all offshore platforms. Daniels underwent multiple surgeries to repair the damage to his leg and required 6 months of rehabilitation before returning to light-duty work. The attack served as a stark reminder of the unexpected dangers that offshore workers face in an environment where industrial operations intersect with wild marine predators. Roughly 70 kilometers south of Port Lincoln in South Australia, lies one of the world's premier destinations for observing great white sharks in their natural environment. On November 3, 2020, these pristine waters became the scene of a shocking incident that underscored the dangerous consequences of human recklessness around apex predators. The shark viewing expedition had been running successfully for over 15 years, offering tourists from around the world the opportunity to observe great white sharks from both the safety of reinforced cages and from specially designed viewing platforms on board their vessel, the Apex Explorer. Captain Trevor Harrison had been conducting these tours for 12 years and maintained an impeccable safety record, strictly adhering to protocols designed to protect both tourists and sharks from dangerous interactions. Among the passengers that morning was Sarah Collins, a 26-year-old social media influencer from Sydney who specialized in extreme wildlife encounters for her online platform. Collins had over 200,000 followers who regularly viewed her content featuring close encounters with dangerous animals around the world. She had specifically booked the tour, hoping to capture dramatic footage of great white sharks for her upcoming documentary series about Australia's most dangerous wildlife. The expedition departed Port Lincoln at 6:00 a.m. under ideal conditions, with calm seas, excellent visibility, and water temperatures around 16 degrees Celsius. The Apex Explorer reached the islands after a 2-hour journey, during which Harrison provided comprehensive safety briefings about great white shark behavior and the strict protocols that governed all interactions with these apex predators. Harrison positioned the vessel over a known aggregation site where great white sharks frequently congregated to hunt seals near the rocky ledges that surrounded the islands. The area's underwater topography featured dramatic drop-offs and cave systems that provided perfect ambush points for large predators hunting the abundant seal population. Within 30 minutes of arriving at the site, passengers were treated to exceptional shark activity, with multiple great whites ranging from 3 to 5 meters in length, cruising past the boat at various depths. The largest specimen appeared to be a mature female, estimated at over 4.5 meters in length, displaying the characteristic scarred skin and massive girth of an apex predator that had dominated these waters for decades. Collins became increasingly excited as she documented the shark encounters with multiple cameras and recording equipment, repeatedly expressing her desire to capture more dramatic footage that would distinguish her content from typical wildlife documentaries. Despite Harrison's clear warnings about maintaining safe distances and the absolute prohibition against any direct contact with the sharks, Collins continued to push for closer access to the animals. The situation escalated when the large female great white began showing increased interest in the boat itself, approaching to within 2 meters of the hull and swimming slowly past the viewing platform where passengers gathered to observe and photograph the marine life. Harrison recognized this behavior as typical investigative activity and assured passengers that the shark posed no threat, as long as everyone remained on board and followed established safety protocols. Collins saw an opportunity to capture what she described as groundbreaking footage of human-shark interaction and began positioning herself at the edge of the boat's viewing platform. Despite repeated warnings from Harrison and several other passengers about the extreme danger of her actions, Collins extended her camera equipment over the railing and leaned far out over the water to get closer shots of the massive predator. The great white shark continued its slow approach, displaying the characteristic curiosity that these apex predators often show toward unfamiliar objects in their territory. As the animal passed directly beneath the viewing platform, Collins made a catastrophic decision that would nearly cost her serious injury or worse. Against all safety protocols and direct orders from the captain, Collins reached down toward the water and attempted to touch the shark's dorsal fin as it glided past the boat. She later claimed that she believed the contact would be minimal and safe, demonstrating a complete misunderstanding of great white shark behavior and reflexes. The moment Collins's hand made contact with the shark's skin, the massive predator reacted with explosive speed and power. Great white sharks possess incredibly sensitive nervous systems and respond aggressively to any unexpected physical contact, particularly in areas near their dorsal fins, where they are most vulnerable to attack from other predators. The shark immediately turned toward the source of the disturbance and launched itself partially out of the water, its massive jaws opening to reveal rows of serrated teeth designed for tearing through flesh and bone. Collins, who was still leaning over the railing, found her right hand directly in the path of the shark's defensive response. The great white's jaws closed on Collins's hand and wrist with tremendous force, estimated at over 4,000 pounds per square inch. The impact lifted her partially off the boat's deck as the shark's momentum carried it upward, creating a terrifying spectacle that was witnessed by all passengers and crew members. The attack lasted approximately 5 seconds before the shark released its grip and disappeared beneath the surface, leaving Collins hanging over the railing with severe injuries to her right hand and forearm. Harrison and several passengers immediately pulled her back onto the deck, while crew members initiated emergency medical procedures. The shark's teeth had inflicted multiple deep puncture wounds and several severe lacerations across Collins's hand, crushing 2 metacarpal bones and severing several tendons in her fingers. Massive bleeding from the wounds required immediate pressure bandages and emergency medical treatment to prevent shock and further blood loss. Harrison immediately radioed for emergency medical evacuation, while the Apex Explorer began emergency transit back to Port Lincoln at maximum speed. A rescue helicopter was dispatched from Adelaide, meeting the vessel approximately halfway back to port to transfer Collins to a trauma center for emergency surgery. The incident was captured on video by multiple passengers and crew members, providing clear documentation of Collins's reckless behavior and the shark's defensive response. Marine biologists who reviewed the footage confirmed that the attack was entirely predictable given the circumstances, and emphasized that great white sharks will always defend themselves when touched or grabbed by unfamiliar objects. Collins underwent multiple surgeries to repair the damage to her hand and required extensive physical therapy to regain partial use of her fingers. The incident effectively ended her career as a wildlife documentarian and led to the implementation of enhanced safety measures and more stringent passenger screening procedures. Marine conservation groups used the incident to highlight the importance of respecting apex predators and maintaining safe distances during wildlife viewing activities, emphasizing that such encounters serve the best interests of both humans and sharks when conducted responsibly. Off the shimmering turquoise edge of the Maldives, where coral atolls dropped into the shadowy blue of the Indian Ocean, 33-year-old Lucas Hartman adjusted the straps of his scuba gear and stared down into the water. A thick haze of blood drifted just beneath the surface, emanating from a bloated sperm whale carcass floating in the open sea. Lucas, a German tourist with a taste for extreme wildlife encounters, had paid a hefty sum to an unlicensed outfit promising access to experiences far beyond legal limits. He'd heard whispers of divers descending beside dead whales to observe tiger sharks feeding, an unsanctioned thrill that regular tours would never allow. The operators ran from a barely maintained speedboat with stripped-down gear, no visible medical kits and no radio. Still, Lucas, driven by adrenaline and a desire to capture rare footage, didn't question it. He strapped on his camera rig and dropped backwards into the water. The first thing he saw below was the enormous ghost-white shape of the whale, suspended in the water like a monument to decay, its flesh sloughing off in strips that spiraled downward. Around it circled at least 6 tiger sharks, large and heavy, their stripes faint against their muscular frames. He began to descend slowly, careful not to appear like prey, his fins pushing gently against the water. The blood cloud was thick and disorienting, reducing visibility and giving every passing shape a ghost-like shimmer. The sharks moved slowly at first, each taking measured bites from the carcass, and their bodies were gliding in lazy arcs. But even as he reached mid-depth, Lucas felt a change. The feeding had shifted. The sharks were no longer simply feeding, they were competing. Their paths became erratic, more forceful. One slammed into another with a powerful sweep of its tail, sending both spinning momentarily in the water. Bits of flesh and fat drifted everywhere, triggering deeper aggression. Lucas hovered 20 feet from the carcass, unaware how close danger truly was. From behind, one of the larger tiger sharks, nearly 12 feet long, scarred from old fights and bloated with gluttony, turned sharply in the water, its eyes wide and unblinking. Amid the haze and movement, Lucas's black fins flashed with the same rhythm as a scavenging fish darting for scraps. The shark accelerated, driven by bloodlust and confusion, its jaws opening wide in a silent, brutal charge. Lucas never saw it coming. The shark bit down across his left ankle in a crushing snap. He felt the explosion of pain like a fire spreading through his leg, then the loss of all feeling. Blood sprayed from the wound instantly, mixing with the thick soup around him. He thrashed involuntarily, bubbles roaring from his regulator as he tried to scream. The shark released him after a single bite, uninterested once it realized the texture was not prey, but the damage was already done. His foot was mangled, tendons severed, a major artery torn. The pain and blood loss surged into his head like fire, and his vision dimmed at the edges. Lucas kicked with his right leg and activated his emergency ascent, each movement weak and uncoordinated. Blood leaked into his mask, tinting his vision red as he rose. The world spun around him as his pulse slowed, and consciousness slipped with the rising pressure. The crew on the surface wasn't watching. They had no spotters in the water, no medical gear on board. It was another tourist who noticed the crimson bloom growing beneath the surface. By the time they pulled Lucas onto the boat, he was drifting in and out of awareness, his mouth moving silently, his lips blue, blood pumping from his shredded ankle and pooling across the deck. No one knew what to do. The operator yelled, fumbling with towels, but there was no radio, no first aid kit, no emergency plan. As precious minutes slipped away, a nearby legal dive boat spotted the commotion. A former paramedic on board recognized the distress, and they sped over, boarding the illegal vessel without waiting for permission. 2 divers stabilized Lucas, tying off the leg with makeshift tourniquets, applying pressure while shouting instructions to the dazed crew. They transferred him onto their vessel, sped back toward the closest island clinic, and radioed ahead for a medevac. Lucas survived the attack, but the blood loss was severe. Doctors worked through the night to save the foot, but the ankle's full function was lost. Tendons had been torn beyond repair and several surgeries followed. He eventually walked again, but with a pronounced limp, the nerve damage permanent, and the strength of his left foot forever gone. When the story broke days later, outrage spread fast. Photos leaked of the whale carcass, the illegal dive boat, and Lucas lying pale and bloodied on a deck smeared red. Authorities launched an immediate investigation. The unlicensed operator vanished, abandoning his equipment and cutting off all contact. The government began shutting down rogue outfits and enforcing stricter controls over dive practices. Inspections increased, and many remote charter services were permanently banned. Lucas, still recovering, became an unexpected voice in the conversation. He posted images of his injury, videos from the dive, and a written account of the reckless setup that nearly killed him. While his posts went viral for their brutal honesty, he was clear about the blame. It wasn't the shark's fault, he wrote. It was his, for trusting an operation that put profit over safety, and for seeking danger without respect for the risks. The whale carcass drifted away with the currents, eventually sinking or being consumed by other scavengers. The sea moved on as it always had, indifferent. But for Lucas, the ocean no longer held the same allure. What had once been a playground for thrills was now a memory of pain, blood, and regret. He continued diving, though never again in open waters like that day. He wore his injury like a badge and spoke often about the ethics of wildlife tourism. He warned others about the false security of illegal tours and the brutal indifference of the ocean. He told them that sharks weren't monsters. They were wild animals following instinct. And it was humans who too often ignored the rules that kept them safe. And every time he looked at the scar that wrapped around his ankle, he remembered the weight of those jaws, the blindness of his own choices, and the cold pull of the sea as it nearly claimed his life. The sky above northern Queensland was choked with heavy clouds, the sea beneath it dark and restless as wind battered the coast and waves crashed against the reef-strewn shoreline. The Australian Coast Guard patrol boat Solander 2 had responded just after dawn to a mayday from a small commercial fishing vessel that had overturned near the rocks. Aboard the Coast Guard ship was Petty Officer Liam Harris, a 38-year-old with 15 years of experience in maritime rescue and a reputation for calm under pressure. He was the kind of man who ran toward danger, driven by duty and instinct, shaped by long years in unforgiving seas. When the Coast Guard reached the wreckage, only debris and 2 crew members clinging to floating gear were visible on the surface. One was bleeding from a head wound, and both were shivering violently. The chopper was grounded due to weather, and visibility below the surface was almost non-existent. One man screamed that a 3rd crew member was trapped inside the submerged wheelhouse. Without hesitation, Liam stripped his jacket and dove into the brown-green water, gear slung tightly and knife secured to his thigh. The current tugged at him immediately. The water was thick with suspended sand and fuel, swirling like smoke in the depths. He swam hard toward the tilted hull, bubbles pouring from his regulator, every movement precise despite the low visibility. He located the narrow opening of the wheelhouse, turned his body sideways, and slipped in. Inside, the light was almost gone, and the creaking metal groaned under pressure. He found the trapped crewman pinned by debris, struggling for breath in an air pocket. Liam moved fast, freeing the man's shoulder, guiding him toward the hatch, kicking upward toward the flicker of daylight above. Neither of them knew what was rising from the deep behind them. Drawn by the thrashing, the blood in the water, and the vibrations of a vessel in distress, a 14-foot bull shark had moved in from the shelf edge where it had been hunting in the murk. It was an apex predator in turbid water, a brutal force evolved for ambush. It didn't hesitate. 1 second, Liam was pulling the injured crewman toward the light, and the next the shark exploded into his side, jaws crushing down on his upper thigh with devastating force. The bite ripped through his wetsuit, through flesh and muscle, crushing bone and severing arteries in one violent strike. Liam never saw it coming. His body twisted in the water as the shark pulled him down, its teeth sawing into him as blood erupted in thick clouds. The injured man was yanked upward by another diver as Liam disappeared into the dark, his leg torn and shredded, bubbles trailing from his mouthpiece as he thrashed with what little strength he had left. The second diver caught a glimpse of the gray blur turning below them, circling for another pass. He screamed through his regulator and signaled for immediate retrieval. They hauled Liam to the surface, arms gripping him tight as more blood streamed into the sea. From the deck, crew members reached down, dragging him aboard with frantic urgency. His face was pale, his eyes fluttering, his lips trembling as he tried to speak. The leg was nearly gone below the hip, mangled and pulsing with every beat of his failing heart. Medics worked on him as the boat surged toward shore, bandages soaked instantly, compressions pounding rhythmically. But the damage was beyond anything field treatment could manage. Liam Harris lost consciousness halfway back and never regained it. He was pronounced dead just minutes before reaching the hospital dock. The blood loss too great, the trauma too severe. The boat fell silent. No one spoke as his body was covered, every man and woman on board shaken by the brutal finality of the attack. The fishing crewman Liam saved survived. He would later say he remembered a hand on his back, pushing him toward the light before he broke the surface. That was the last thing he felt, just that single firm gesture from the man who never hesitated. News of Liam's death swept through the Coast Guard community like a storm. Petty Officer Harris had saved lives before, had faced cyclones and submerged wrecks, and had always returned. This time he hadn't. Fellow rescue workers gathered in silence, staring out at the ocean from which he never returned, knowing it could just as easily have been any one of them. His widow received the call that evening, and a wave of grief spread through the tight-knit team that had trusted him with their lives on more than one occasion. Marine authorities began an investigation, reviewing protocols and calling for changes to how rescues were performed in shark-prone waters. Some asked whether divers should enter the sea at all without surface-level shark deterrence, even in emergencies. Others argued that time was too precious in these situations, that the sea was always a risk, and that heroes like Liam knew what they were accepting every time they put on their gear. The bull shark was never found. It had vanished back into the murky shelf waters, just another shadow among many, but the trauma it left behind did not fade. Liam's gear was recovered, his dive knife still secured in its sheath. The crew later said that his final act, the dive, the rescue, the fight to get the injured man to safety, was exactly what he would have chosen to do. A memorial was held at the pier 2 days later, with flags at half-mast and his helmet placed on a folded uniform beside the national ensign. Colleagues spoke of his calm resolve, his quick thinking, and his refusal to let fear dictate his choices. His name was etched into the Coast Guard's Wall of the Fallen, among others who had given everything in the name of duty. The sea was quieter in the days that followed, the water still dark, still filled with the secrets of creatures unseen. But in the memory of those who had known him, Petty Officer Liam Harris would always be there, somewhere below the surface, in the currents and the silence, guarding those who dared to rescue others in the deep. The air hung cold and damp over the remote marine park on the Pacific coast of eastern Russia. Morning fog still clung to the tops of the pine-covered cliffs behind the facility, as the ocean lapped quietly against the concrete walls of the orca enclosures. Elena Volkov, a seasoned marine mammal trainer with over a decade of experience, stood at the edge of the largest tank, her breath visible in the chilly air. At 39, she had devoted her life to the care and study of captive orcas, developing bonds with the park's pod that few others had ever known. But on that bitter morning, as she stepped into position with her bucket of frozen herring and mackerel, she could feel something was wrong. The orcas were behaving strangely. The 4 animals, 2 females and 2 males, circled tightly beneath the surface, barely responding to her familiar gestures. Elena recognized the signs. Tension pulsed through the water. Their movements were quick, twitchy, and almost impatient. The largest male, a 20-foot, 6-ton bull named Radek, had refused food the day before and had been bumping the gate walls throughout the night. The others had mimicked his energy. Still, the show had been canceled, and the morning session was meant only to re-establish calm through simple reinforcement exercises. Elena knelt beside the pool, tossed in a few fish, and signaled for a turn. The youngest female responded first, brushing the edge and accepting her meal with an easy glide. But Radek stayed back, circling deeper, his white underside flashing now and then like a warning. She moved slowly, her hands precise and deliberate. She knew these animals well, understood their signals, and trusted her instincts. But as she extended her arm with a fish in hand, Radek surged. With terrifying speed, the orca shot upward, mouth wide and eyes locked. Elena had no time to react before his jaws clamped down on her right forearm. The force was staggering. Pain exploded through her body as she was lifted off the platform and dragged into the water in one violent pull. Staff on the catwalk above reacted instantly. Alarms blared. 2 trainers ran for noise deterrence, banging pipes and slamming gates to distract Radek. But Elena was underwater, held fast, spun by the massive predator in a twisting, disorienting cyclone of foam and cold. Her lungs burned as she thrashed, her free hand clawing for the surface while her ribs compressed beneath the water's pressure and the crushing grip of the orca's jaws. Radek did not shake her violently. He simply held her, his teeth embedded deep in flesh and muscle, dragging her in a wide arc before releasing her without warning. She surfaced, gasping, blood in her mouth, water in her nose, her right arm limp and torn. 2 staff members reached from the platform with poles, pulling her toward the barrier as another orca approached from below, curious and agitated by the commotion. Just as they reached her, Radek lunged again. He didn't bite this time. Instead, he rammed the platform, spraying the trainers with water and pushing Elena back under with the wake. She screamed through clenched teeth as pain surged through her chest. One of the trainers jumped in, swinging a metal pole between her and the orca. Backup barriers slammed shut overhead. Alarms continued blaring. Finally, Radek retreated, slipping into a darker corner of the pool, trailing swirls of crimson. Elena was hauled out and laid onto the concrete, her soaked body shaking violently from cold and shock. Her right arm was shredded from elbow to wrist, muscle visibly torn, and her ribs were fractured where Radek's teeth had pressed into her torso. Her breathing was shallow, panicked, and wheezing through the damage. But she was alive. Medics arrived within minutes. They stabilized her arm, wrapped her torso, and raced her to the local hospital. She spent 3 days in intensive care and underwent 2 surgeries to repair the torn ligaments and fractured bones. Doctors said she was fortunate. If the orca had held on any longer or dragged her deeper, the result would have been fatal. Back at the park, the orcas were isolated and monitored. Trainers ceased all physical contact sessions. Officials launched a full investigation into the incident, reviewing protocols, feeding routines, and behavioral logs. Video footage showed the initial lunge in full detail, how quickly a trained animal, known for years, had reverted in an instant to wild instinct. The attack shocked the staff. Elena had been admired not just for her experience, but for her intuitive understanding of the animals. That bond, many believed, had kept her safe for years. But the illusion of control, however comforting, had shattered the moment Radek acted on impulse. Debates surged across social media and in marine biology circles. Critics of orca captivity called the incident predictable, another example of how intelligent, powerful animals, when confined in limited spaces, could only be pushed so far. Supporters argued it was an anomaly, A tragic event not unlike accidents involving horses or dogs, trained creatures capable of unpredictable harm. Elena stayed quiet during recovery, refusing interviews until she had regained strength. When she finally spoke, her voice was measured and calm. She didn't blame Radek. She acknowledged the stress signals she had felt before the attack, admitting she had underestimated their meaning. She expressed love for the animals, but also called for changes. Better safety protocols, more space, more respect for the orca's limits. The marine park suspended public shows indefinitely. Staff were retrained, and physical contact was removed from all care routines. Radek was not punished. He remained under close observation, his behavior studied, and his environment enriched to reduce stress. The scars on Elena's arm healed slowly. The damage to her ribs remained sore for months. But the deeper wounds, ones that forced her to reevaluate everything she thought she knew about connection, trust, and instinct, stayed hidden behind her calm eyes and quiet words. The orcas swam in their circles. The gates stayed closed, and the echoes of that violent moment rippled far beyond the cold walls of the tank, stirring a conversation about captivity, danger, and the thin line between understanding and control. Waters off Nauset Beach in Cape Cod, Massachusetts, had always been a gathering place for Independence Day celebrations. In 2025, the tradition continued as hundreds of families lined the sandy shores to watch the annual fireworks display. Cape Cod's outer beaches were notorious for their great white shark population, particularly during summer months when seals migrated through the area. Although multiple warning signs about shark activity had been posted in the area, the excitement of the July 4th celebration often overshadowed these concerns. Nauset Beach stretched for miles along the Atlantic coast, its powerful surf creating the perfect conditions for both marine life and beachgoers. The area had experienced a significant increase in shark sightings over the past decade, with marine biologists attributing this to the recovering seal population and warming ocean temperatures. Local authorities had implemented new safety protocols, including aerial patrols and beach closures when sharks were spotted. But enforcement became challenging during major holiday events. 3 friends had traveled from Boston specifically for the Cape Cod fireworks celebration. Meredith Blackstone, a 28-year-old marketing executive, had convinced her college roommates to join her for what she promised would be an unforgettable holiday weekend. Catalina Voss, 26, worked as a graphic designer and had been looking forward to the trip for months. The third member of their group, Penelope Hartwell, 29, taught elementary school and had just finished her summer vacation planning. As darkness fell and the first fireworks began exploding overhead, the 3 women decided to take a quick swim to cool off from the humid July evening. The beach remained crowded with families spread across blankets, children running with sparklers, and couples walking hand in hand along the waterline. The lifeguard stations had officially closed at sunset, but the women felt confident swimming together in the shallow water just beyond where the waves broke. Meredith entered the water first, commenting on how refreshing it felt after the day's heat. Catalina and Penelope followed, wading out until they were chest-deep in the dark Atlantic. The fireworks created brilliant reflections on the water's surface, and the women treaded water while pointing out their favorite explosions overhead. The sound of cheering from the beach mixed with the rhythmic crash of waves against the shore. The great white shark approached from deeper water, likely drawn by the vibrations and splashing created by the swimmers. Marine experts would later theorize that the fireworks' bright flashes and loud explosions may have disoriented the predator, causing it to investigate the unusual activity near the surface. The shark measured approximately 14 feet in length and had been hunting in the area for several days, feeding on the abundant seal population that frequented the outer Cape waters. Without warning, the shark struck Meredith first, its powerful jaws clamping down on her left thigh just above the knee. She screamed as the predator's razor-sharp teeth punctured her wetsuit and tore deep into muscle tissue. The force of the attack pulled her underwater momentarily before she managed to surface, blood spreading rapidly in the dark water around her. The shark's initial bite lasted only seconds, but the damage was severe and immediate. Catalina, swimming just a few feet away, witnessed the attack and began swimming frantically toward shore while screaming for help. However, the shark's hunting instincts had been fully activated, and it turned its attention to her next. The predator seized her right arm in its jaws, shaking violently before releasing her and circling back for another approach. Penelope, realizing her friends were under attack, attempted to reach them, but became the shark's third victim when it bit down on her ankle and lower leg. Beachgoers initially thought the women's screams were part of the holiday celebration, but several people near the water's edge quickly recognized the genuine terror in their voices. A group of men who had been drinking beer around a bonfire immediately grabbed boogie boards and rushed into the surf. Two teenage lifeguards, who had been watching the fireworks from the beach, ran to the water despite being off duty, bringing a rescue tube and emergency radio. The shark continued its aggressive behavior for nearly 3 minutes, making multiple passes at the struggling women. Meredith managed to stay afloat despite her severe leg injury, while Catalina attempted to swim one-handed toward shore. Penelope, with her ankle badly damaged, relied on her two friends to help keep her above water. The predator seemed particularly agitated by the continued splashing and the taste of blood in the water. Several brave beachgoers formed a human chain extending into the surf, allowing them to reach the women and pull them to safety. The shark made one final aggressive approach as the rescue was underway, but the increased human activity and noise seemed to finally drive it back toward deeper water. Emergency medical services had been called immediately, and paramedics were already on scene when the women reached the beach. All 3 women survived the attack, though each required extensive surgery and months of rehabilitation. Meredith's thigh wounds required over 200 stitches, while Catalina suffered nerve damage in her arm that took nearly a year to heal completely. Penelope's ankle injuries were the most severe, requiring multiple reconstructive surgeries and permanent hardware implants. The incident prompted immediate changes to Cape Cod's beach safety protocols, including mandatory lifeguard coverage during all major holiday events and improved shark detection technology. The 3 friends eventually recovered from their physical injuries, though each admitted that their relationship with the ocean had changed forever. Byron Bay, located on the far north coast of New South Wales, Australia, had long been considered one of the country's premier coastal destinations. In 2017, the area attracted surfers, swimmers, and marine enthusiasts from around the world who came to experience its pristine beaches and crystal-clear waters. The region's unique position, where warm currents from the north met cooler southern waters, created an incredibly diverse marine ecosystem that supported everything from colorful tropical fish to massive apex predators. Local authorities had documented a steady increase in shark sightings over the previous 5 years, though actual attacks remained extremely rare. An extensive shark monitoring program, including tagged individuals and aerial surveillance, was in place, but the vastness of the ocean made it impossible to track every predator in the area. Elara Finch, a 31-year-old graphic designer from Melbourne, had joined her university friends for what had become an annual reunion weekend aboard a luxury yacht. The group of 20 friends had been maintaining this tradition for nearly 8 years, renting increasingly impressive vessels as their careers flourished and their disposable income grew. This year's charter was a 60-foot motor yacht complete with professional crew, water sports equipment, and all the amenities needed for a perfect weekend getaway. The group had anchored in a sheltered cove approximately 2 miles off the Byron Bay coastline, where the water was deep enough for the yacht, but protected from the larger ocean swells. The location offered stunning views of the lighthouse and hinterland, while providing easy access to some of the region's best swimming and snorkeling spots. Several members of the group were experienced sailors, and had specifically chosen this anchorage for its reputation as a safe and beautiful location. Saturday afternoon found the friends relaxing on deck after a morning of fishing and exploring nearby beaches. The water temperature was perfect for swimming, and several people had already taken turns jumping from the yacht's diving platform. Elara, who had been an accomplished swimmer since childhood and had completed several ocean swimming events, was eager to enjoy a longer swim in the clear blue water. The yacht's captain, a local man with over 20 years of experience in Byron Bay waters, had briefed the group about local marine life, but had not mentioned any specific shark warnings for the area. Recent aerial patrols had not detected any large predators in the immediate vicinity, and the calm conditions seemed ideal for water activities. Elara entered the water from the yacht's stern platform, diving cleanly into the deep blue water and surfacing with obvious enjoyment. She began swimming a slow freestyle stroke, moving in a large circle around the anchored vessel while her friends watched from the deck. The water clarity allowed those aboard to track her progress easily, and several people took photographs of her swimming with the spectacular Byron Bay coastline in the background. The great white shark that would soon attack Ilara had been hunting in the area for several days, following a pod of fur seals that had been feeding on a large school of tuna nearby. The shark measured over 15 feet in length and was estimated to weigh nearly 3,000 pounds, making it one of the larger specimens commonly found in Australian waters. It had likely been attracted to the area by the combination of abundant prey and the deep water that allowed it to hunt effectively. Marine biologists would later theorize that the shark may have been investigating the yacht itself, as great whites were known to show curiosity about unfamiliar objects in their territory. The presence of multiple people in the water, combined with the sounds and vibrations created by the boat's generators and air conditioning systems, may have created a sensory environment that triggered the shark's predatory instincts. Ilara had been swimming for approximately 15 minutes when the attack occurred. Friends watching from the yacht later reported that she had just completed another lap around the vessel and was swimming parallel to the hull when the shark struck from below. The attack was sudden and devastating, with the massive predator breaching partially out of the water as it seized Ilara in its jaws. The great white clamped down on Ilara's upper thigh and hip area with tremendous force, its serrated teeth causing immediate and catastrophic injuries. Friends aboard the yacht began screaming and throwing objects into the water in desperate attempts to distract the shark, while others prepared life rings and called emergency services on the yacht's radio. The shark maintained its grip for nearly 30 seconds, thrashing violently while Ilara struggled in its jaws. The attack occurred close enough to the yacht that her friends could clearly see the massive size of the predator and the severity of her injuries. Despite their frantic efforts to help, including one friend diving into the water with a boat hook, they were unable to drive off the shark or reach Ilara in time. When the shark finally released its grip and disappeared back into the depths, Ilara was unconscious and bleeding heavily from multiple severe wounds. Her friends managed to pull her from the water within minutes, but the damage was too extensive for any emergency treatment to be effective. The yacht's crew and several friends with medical training worked desperately to stem the bleeding and maintain her airway, but Ilara had lost consciousness and never regained it. Emergency services arrived by helicopter within 20 minutes of the initial distress call, but paramedics confirmed what her friends already knew. Ilara had died from her injuries before help could arrive, becoming one of the few fatal shark attack victims in Byron Bay's recorded history. The attack sent shockwaves through the local community and prompted an immediate review of water safety protocols for recreational boating in the area. Marine biologists conducted extensive research into the incident, ultimately concluding that it represented an unusual convergence of factors rather than evidence of increased shark aggression in the region. Ilara's friends were traumatized by witnessing the attack and required extensive counseling to process the experience. Several members of the group reported ongoing anxiety about ocean activities, while others became advocates for shark research and conservation efforts. They established a memorial scholarship in Ilara's name that supported marine biology students studying shark behavior and ecosystem protection. The incident reminded the Byron Bay community that despite the area's reputation for safe swimming and water sports, they shared these beautiful waters with apex predators that commanded respect and caution. While fatal attacks remained extremely rare, the ocean's inherent unpredictability meant that tragedy could strike even in seemingly perfect conditions. Local authorities increased shark monitoring efforts in popular recreational areas and implemented new guidelines for yacht anchoring and swimming activities, though they emphasized that the attack represented an isolated incident rather than a systemic safety problem. Situated along the Black Sea coast in Russia, a major marine entertainment facility had operated since 2014 as one of the country's premier attractions. Originally built as part of the Winter Olympics infrastructure improvements, it housed dolphins, beluga whales, and 2 captive orcas in what management described as state-of-the-art conditions aimed at promoting both animal welfare and educational experiences for visitors. By 2018, the marine park attracted over 300,000 visitors annually, with its orca shows being the most popular attraction. The facility employed a team of marine mammal trainers who had been recruited from facilities around the world. many bringing decades of experience working with large cetaceans in captivity. Safety protocols were extensive, based on international standards, and modified to account for the specific challenges of working with orcas. Ivan Morozov, a 35-year-old marine mammal trainer originally from Vladivostok, had been working with orcas for over 12 years before joining the Sochi team. His previous experience included positions at facilities in Japan and Norway, where he had developed expertise in orca behavior modification and show choreography. Ivan was considered one of the most skilled trainers on staff and regularly worked with the facility's more challenging animals. The incident occurred during a routine afternoon show on a busy Wednesday in August 2018. The amphitheater was filled to capacity with families enjoying summer vacations along the Black Sea coast. Ivan was conducting a demonstration that involved close interaction with Svetlana, the larger of the two female orcas, who weighed approximately 4,500 pounds and measured 22 feet in length. The show had been progressing normally, with Svetlana performing her trained behaviors on cue and responding appropriately to Ivan's signals and commands. The routine included several segments where Ivan would stand at the pool's edge while the orca approached for fish rewards and brief physical contact. These interactions were carefully choreographed and had been performed hundreds of times without incident. Svetlana had been displaying subtle signs of agitation throughout the morning, according to other trainers who had worked with her during feeding sessions. She had been slower to respond to commands and had shown reluctance to participate in some of her usual enrichment activities. However, these behavioral changes were not considered severe enough to cancel the afternoon show. The attack occurred during a segment where Ivan was positioned on a partially submerged platform, allowing him to interact with Svetlana at water level while maintaining the safety margin required by facility protocols. The orca was supposed to approach the platform, accept a fish reward, and allow Ivan to briefly touch her rostrum before returning to the center of the pool. Instead of following the familiar routine, Svetlana surged forward with unexpected speed and aggression, lunging partially out of the water to reach Ivan on the platform. Her massive jaws clamped down on his left forearm with tremendous force, easily penetrating his wetsuit and crushing down on bone and muscle tissue. Ivan screamed as the orca's conical teeth punctured his arm in multiple locations. The attack lasted approximately 15 seconds, during which Svetlana maintained her grip while shaking her head violently from side to side. Ivan struggled to free himself while other trainers rushed to intervene, using emergency protocols that included high-pressure water hoses and loud acoustic signals designed to interrupt aggressive behavior. The orca's bite force caused immediate fractures to both bones in Ivan's forearm and severed several major blood vessels. Svetlana's thrashing motions threatened to drag him completely into the pool, where his chances of survival would have been minimal given the orca's size and agitation level. Fellow trainers managed to distract Svetlana using emergency procedures that involved multiple stimulus interruptions and the presence of her companion orca in an adjacent pool. The combination of water pressure, acoustic signals, and competing stimuli eventually caused her to release her grip on Ivan's arm and retreat to the deeper section of her enclosure. Ivan was immediately pulled from the platform and rushed to the facility's medical station, where staff worked to control the severe bleeding from his puncture wounds. An ambulance had been called within moments of the attack, and paramedics arrived to find Ivan conscious, but in shock from blood loss and trauma. The audience, many of whom had been recording the show on their phones, witnessed the entire attack and its aftermath. Facility management immediately evacuated the amphitheater and suspended all marine mammal shows, pending a complete investigation of the incident and review of safety protocols. Surgeons worked for over 4 hours to repair the extensive damage to Ivan's forearm, including reconstruction of torn blood vessels, muscle tissue, and nerve pathways. The orca's teeth had caused deep puncture wounds that required careful cleaning to prevent infection, while the crushing force of the bite had created complex fractures that needed surgical stabilization. Ivan's recovery required multiple surgeries over several months to address complications from his injuries and to restore function to his damaged arm. Physical therapy continued for over a year, and while he eventually regained most of the use of his arm, he never returned to working directly with orcas. The incident prompted a comprehensive review of safety protocols at the facility and led to significant changes in how trainers interacted with the orcas during shows and training sessions. New barriers were installed to increase separation between trainers and animals, while emergency response procedures were enhanced based on lessons learned from Ivan's attack. Coastal waters off Gansbaai, South Africa, have earned their reputation as one of the world's most concentrated great white shark territories. Located roughly 180 kilometers southeast of Cape Town, this stretch of the Atlantic Ocean formed part of what marine biologists called Shark Alley, where the nutrient-rich waters and abundant seal populations created an ideal hunting ground for apex predators. On July 1, 2025, these same waters would transform a routine tourist flight into a nightmare that would haunt survivors for years to come. The seaplane excursion had been marketed as the ultimate shark-spotting adventure, offering Russian tourists Dmitry Volkov, Yelena Petrov, Sergei Kozlov, Natasha Romanoff, and Boris Mikhailov breathtaking aerial views of great whites in their natural habitat. The single-engine Cessna 208 Caravan had completed dozens of similar flights without incident, piloted by Captain Johan Wessels, a veteran with over 15 years of experience navigating the treacherous coastal conditions. At approximately 2:47 p.m., while circling at 800 feet above a particularly active feeding area, the aircraft's engine began producing irregular, sputtering sounds. Captain Wessels immediately attempted to radio the nearest airfield, but within seconds, the engine seized completely. The silence that followed was deafening as the plane began its inevitable descent toward the churning waters below. Wessels managed to level the aircraft for what pilots call a controlled water landing, but the choppy seas and strong crosswinds made precision impossible. The Cessna struck the water at a steep angle, its right wing catching a wave and sending the aircraft into a violent cartwheel. The impact shattered the passenger windows and twisted the fuselage, instantly flooding the cabin with frigid Atlantic water. Dmitry Volkov, a construction engineer from Moscow, found himself trapped beneath twisted metal and debris. His left shoulder had been dislocated during the crash, making it nearly impossible to swim effectively. Yelena Petrov, who had been seated near the emergency exit, managed to kick out the remaining glass from her window and pull herself onto a floating section of the wing. Her face bore multiple lacerations from the shattered glass, blood streaming into the salt water around her. Captain Wessels had sustained a severe head injury but remained conscious enough to help coordinate the survivors' escape from the sinking aircraft. Sergei Kozlov and Natasha Romanov clung to a detached passenger seat that had somehow remained buoyant, while Boris Mikhailov floated nearby, his right leg clearly broken and bent at an unnatural angle. The water temperature hovered around 14 degrees Celsius, cold enough to induce hypothermia within hours. More immediately concerning was the blood from their various injuries, which began to disperse in crimson trails through the water. What the survivors did not yet realize was that their distress calls were being monitored by a predator far more dangerous than the cold. A massive female great white shark, measuring approximately 4.5 meters in length, had been patrolling the area when the unusual commotion and scent of blood drew her attention. She had been hunting unsuccessfully for several hours, and was in an increasingly aggressive state. The erratic splashing and panicked movements of the survivors triggered her predatory instincts. The first attack came without warning. Dmitry Volkov suddenly felt an enormous force slam into his injured shoulder, followed by excruciating pressure as powerful jaws clamped down on his upper arm. The shark's serrated teeth punctured through muscle and scraped against bone, causing him to scream in agony as he was pulled beneath the surface. Somehow he managed to strike the shark's snout with his good arm, causing it to release its grip and retreat momentarily. Yelena Petrov witnessed the attack from her position on the wing fragment and began frantically splashing water toward the shark, hoping to distract it from Dmitry. Her strategy backfired catastrophically. The increased commotion attracted the predator's attention, and within seconds, she felt the unmistakable sensation of being lifted from the water as the shark's jaws closed around her left thigh. The crushing force was unlike anything she had ever experienced, and she could feel her femur crack under the pressure. Captain Wessels, despite his own injuries, attempted to swim toward Yelena with a piece of debris to strike the shark. Before he could reach her, the massive predator released its grip and disappeared beneath the murky water, leaving Yelena floating in a growing pool of her own blood. The shark continued its assault, making calculated strikes on Sergei Kozlov's right calf and inflicting severe puncture wounds on Boris Mikhailov's uninjured leg. Each attack seemed methodical, as if the predator was testing the survivors rather than attempting to consume them. Natasha Romanov, who had remained relatively uninjured during the plane crash, found herself in the terrifying position of trying to keep the group together while watching helplessly as her companions were systematically mauled by the relentless predator. The rescue helicopter finally arrived at 5:23 p.m., nearly 3 hours after the initial distress call. Paramedics worked frantically to stabilize the survivors, who had lost substantial amounts of blood and were showing severe signs of hypothermia and shock. All 5 tourists survived their ordeal, though Dmitry Volkov required multiple surgeries to repair the extensive damage to his shoulder and arm, and Yelena Petrov faced a lengthy rehabilitation process for her fractured femur and damaged thigh muscles. The incident prompted immediate reviews of safety protocols for seaplane tours operating in shark-populated waters, with authorities implementing mandatory emergency beacon systems and revised flight paths to avoid known predator feeding zones. The Great Ocean Road region of Victoria, Australia, stretches along some of the most spectacular and treacherous coastline in the Southern Hemisphere. Near Port Campbell, where the dramatic limestone cliffs of the 12 Apostles meet the Southern Ocean, the waters have historically attracted both tourists seeking marine wildlife encounters and great white sharks following seasonal seal migrations. This convergence of human activity and apex predator territory has occasionally resulted in tragic encounters. On March 8, 2019, these pristine waters would become the scene of one of Australia's most devastating shark attacks in recent memory. The Marine Wildlife Tour offered visitors the opportunity to observe seals, dolphins, and occasionally great white sharks from the safety of their purpose-built vessel, the Neptune Explorer. Captain Sarah McKinnon had been piloting these waters for 8 years and maintained an exemplary safety record, strictly adhering to guidelines that prohibited swimming or snorkeling in areas known for shark activity. Among the passengers that morning were Mark Dawson, a 41-year-old investment banker from Manchester, England, and his longtime friend Jason Whitmore, a 38-year-old photographer who had traveled to Australia specifically to document the region's marine life. The 2 men had been planning this trip for over 2 years and had specifically chosen the Port Campbell tour based on its reputation for shark sightings. The tour departed at 8:30 a.m. under ideal conditions, with calm seas, excellent visibility, and water temperatures around 18 degrees Celsius. McKinnon had positioned the vessel approximately 2 kilometers offshore from the seal colony at Seal Rocks, where great white sharks were known to hunt during the morning hours. The area's underwater topography featured steep drop-offs and rocky ledges that provided perfect ambush points for large predators. Within the first hour of the excursion, passengers had been treated to exceptional wildlife viewing, including a pod of bottlenose dolphins and several fur seals playing near the surface. The excitement reached its peak when McKinnon spotted a massive great white shark cruising slowly past the boat at a depth of approximately 10 meters. The animal appeared to be a mature female, estimated at over 4 meters in length, moving with the characteristic deliberate grace of an apex predator. Dawson became increasingly excited by the proximity of the shark, repeatedly expressing his desire to get a closer look and photograph the animal from water level. Despite McKinnon's clear warnings about the extreme danger of entering the water in a known hunting zone, and her explanation of the company's strict no-swimming policy, Dawson continued to press for permission to at least dip his feet over the side of the boat. The situation escalated when the great white disappeared from view beneath the vessel. McKinnon immediately began scanning the surrounding water with polarized sunglasses, knowing that great whites often approach boats from below when investigating potential prey. She announced to all passengers that the shark was likely still in the immediate vicinity and reinforced the absolute prohibition against any water contact. Against all safety protocols and direct orders from the captain, Dawson made a fatal decision that would cost him his life. While McKinnon was distracted by radio communication with another tour boat reporting shark activity in the area, Dawson quietly moved to the stern of the vessel and lowered himself into the water, believing he could safely observe the shark while holding on to the boat's swim platform. The attack occurred within seconds of Dawson entering the water. The great white, which had indeed been circling beneath the boat, immediately detected the unusual commotion and investigated. Whitmore, who had been setting up his camera equipment nearby, was the first to notice his friend's unauthorized water entry and shouted a warning just as the massive predator launched its assault. The shark struck from directly below with tremendous force, its jaws clamping down on Dawson's upper thigh and hip area. The impact lifted him partially out of the water before dragging him beneath the surface in a violent display of raw predatory power. The attack was swift and devastating, with the shark's serrated teeth inflicting catastrophic damage to major blood vessels and bone structure. Whitmore immediately jumped into the water despite the obvious danger, driven by desperation to save his friend's life. He managed to grab Dawson's arms and attempted to pull him back toward the boat while the shark maintained its grip. McKinnon threw a life ring, while other passengers grabbed boat hooks and emergency equipment to assist in the rescue attempt. The struggle in the water lasted approximately 30 seconds, during which time Whitmore fought frantically to free his friend from the shark's jaws. The predator's grip proved unbreakable, and the severity of Dawson's injuries became apparent as massive amounts of blood clouded the surrounding water. Despite Whitmore's heroic efforts and the quick response of other passengers, the damage inflicted by the great white was simply too severe. McKinnon managed to retrieve both men from the water using the boat's hydraulic platform, but Dawson had already lost consciousness due to massive blood loss and trauma. Emergency medical procedures were immediately initiated by a retired paramedic who happened to be among the tour passengers, but the injuries to Dawson's femoral artery and hip joint were beyond the scope of first aid treatment. The Neptune Explorer immediately began emergency transit to the nearest harbor, while McKinnon radioed for a helicopter medical evacuation. A rescue helicopter was dispatched from Melbourne, but the nearest suitable landing area was over 40 minutes away by boat. Despite continuous CPR and emergency medical attention from the qualified passenger, Dawson succumbed to his injuries approximately 25 minutes after the attack. Whitmore sustained minor injuries during his rescue attempt, including several deep scratches on his arms and torso from the shark's rough skin, but his actions were credited with preventing the complete loss of Dawson's body to the predator. The traumatic experience left lasting psychological impacts on all witnesses, particularly Whitmore, who blamed himself for not preventing his friend's decision to enter the water. The incident prompted immediate reviews of safety protocols for marine tour operators throughout Victoria, with enhanced emphasis on passenger briefings and stricter enforcement of no-swimming policies. Marine biologists noted that the attack was consistent with typical great white hunting behavior in seal habitats, where the sharks rely on explosive ambush tactics to overcome prey. The remote waterways of the Northern Territory represent some of Australia's most pristine and dangerous wilderness areas, where saltwater crocodiles have ruled as apex predators for millions of years. The Adelaide River, located approximately 60 kilometers east of Darwin, winds through dense tropical vegetation and mangrove swamps that provide ideal habitat for these massive reptiles. The river system has been home to some of the largest saltwater crocodiles ever recorded, with specimens exceeding 6 meters in length and weighing over 1,000 kilograms. On January 15, 2017, these ancient waters would claim the life of a tourist who underestimated the lethal capabilities of one of nature's most efficient killing machines. Emma Collins, a 29-year-old marine biology graduate student from Brisbane, had traveled to the Northern Territory with her husband James Collins, a 32-year-old environmental lawyer, to conduct research on estuarine ecosystem recovery following recent flooding events. The couple had been documenting water quality and wildlife populations as part of Emma's doctoral thesis on climate change impacts in tropical river systems. Their research had been officially approved, though they had been repeatedly warned about the extreme dangers posed by saltwater crocodiles in the region. The Adelaide River system had experienced unusually high water levels following heavy monsoon rains in December 2016, which had displaced many crocodiles from their normal territories and increased the likelihood of human-wildlife encounters. Local authorities had issued warnings advising extreme caution near all waterways, particularly in areas where crocodile activity had not previously been documented due to the recent flooding. Emma and James had established their research campsite near a bend in the river where the water appeared relatively shallow and clear, approximately 25 kilometers upstream from the main tourist areas. The location had been chosen specifically because preliminary surveys had not detected any crocodile activity in the immediate vicinity, though both researchers understood that the recent flooding had made such assessments unreliable. The temperature that afternoon had reached 38 degrees Celsius, with humidity levels exceeding 85%. Creating oppressive conditions that made outdoor research work extremely challenging. Emma had been collecting water samples from various depths using specialized equipment when she began to show signs of heat exhaustion, including dizziness and excessive sweating. Against established safety protocols and her husband's objections, Emma decided to wade into the shallow water near the riverbank to cool herself down. James had repeatedly warned her about the dangers of entering any Northern Territory waterway, regardless of how safe it might appear. But Emma believed that the clear, shallow water posed minimal risk if she remained within a few meters of shore. James positioned himself on the muddy riverbank approximately 10 meters away from where Emma entered the water, maintaining visual contact while continuing to monitor their research equipment. The water initially appeared to be only knee-deep, and Emma reported that the cooler temperature provided immediate relief from the oppressive heat. Unknown to either researcher, a massive male saltwater crocodile measuring approximately 5.2 meters in length had been lying motionless in deeper water roughly 30 meters upstream. The animal had remained virtually invisible beneath the murky surface, employing the ambush hunting strategy that had made saltwater crocodiles the most successful large predators in the region for millions of years. Saltwater crocodiles are capable of remaining submerged and motionless for extended periods while monitoring potential prey, using specialized sensory organs to detect even minor vibrations in the water. Emma's entry into the river had immediately registered on the predator's sophisticated detection system, triggering a calculated stalking response. The attack occurred with the lightning speed and devastating force that characterizes saltwater crocodile predation. Emma had been in the water for approximately 3 minutes when the massive reptile launched its assault from the deeper channel, covering the distance to its target in a matter of seconds despite its enormous size. James watched in horror as the crocodile's massive jaws erupted from the water and clamped down on Emma's left leg with bone-crushing force. The impact was so violent that Emma was immediately pulled beneath the surface, disappearing into the murky water without even having time to scream for help. The characteristic hunting behavior of saltwater crocodiles involves what biologists call the death roll, where the predator grips its victim and rotates violently to disorient and drown the prey. James could see the water churning violently as the crocodile performed this deadly maneuver with his wife, creating a maelstrom of bubbles and disturbed sediment that obscured any view of what was happening beneath the surface. Driven by desperation and adrenaline, James immediately waded into the shallow water while shouting at the top of his lungs, hoping to distract or intimidate the crocodile into releasing Emma. He grabbed a heavy piece of driftwood and began striking the water's surface while screaming his wife's name, but the massive predator showed no response to his presence. The attack lasted approximately 90 seconds before the water returned to an ominous calm, with no sign of either Emma or the crocodile. James continued his frantic efforts to locate his wife, diving repeatedly into the murky water despite the obvious danger of a second attack. But the poor visibility and strong current made any effective search impossible. James immediately activated his emergency satellite beacon and attempted to call for help using his satellite phone. Though the remote location meant that emergency responders would require several hours to reach the scene, he spent the next 4 hours walking along the riverbank and calling Emma's name, hoping against all logic that she might have somehow escaped the crocodile's grip and made it to shore downstream. The first emergency responders arrived by helicopter at approximately 6:30 p.m., including police officers, parks and wildlife rangers, and a specialized crocodile management team. An extensive search operation was immediately initiated, involving underwater sonar equipment and experienced divers. But the river's depth and strong current made recovery efforts extremely challenging. The massive saltwater crocodile was located and destroyed by wildlife rangers the following morning, approximately 2 kilometers downstream from the attack site. Emma's body was recovered from the predator's stomach during the subsequent necropsy, confirming the worst fears of her family and colleagues. The tragic incident prompted renewed calls for stricter enforcement of crocodile safety guidelines and enhanced warning systems in remote research areas. Environmental authorities noted that the attack was entirely consistent with normal saltwater crocodile hunting behavior and emphasized that no waterway in the Northern Territory should ever be considered safe for human entry. James Collins established a memorial foundation in his wife's name to promote crocodile safety education and support research into non-invasive wildlife monitoring techniques that would reduce the need for researchers to work in close proximity to dangerous predators. Just off the jagged South African coastline, where warm currents licked the edges of deeper, colder waters, a neon-lit floating nightclub called The Drift rocked softly in the midnight swell. Music pulsed through the night, its beat blending with the ocean's rhythm. The crowd, a mix of tourists and locals, danced, drank, and laughed under the stars. Among them was 27-year-old Kieran, a backpacker from Ireland seeking adventure, and Zanelle, a 25-year-old local from Cape Town celebrating her promotion with friends. The party glowed with life, the platform buzzing with energy, and the scent of grilled seafood lingering from the ship's galley. As the heat of dancing built and drinks flowed freely, a group of partygoers, lured by the warmth of the night in the water, stripped down and climbed over the railings, diving into the dark sea. The water felt smooth and inviting, and they swam near the lights reflecting off the boat, laughing and splashing, unaware that beneath the surface, something ancient and deadly had already been drawn in. Earlier that night, the kitchen staff had carelessly dumped buckets of fish scraps overboard, unaware that the scent had drifted downward and outward, cutting through the murk like a trail of blood. It reached a great white shark, a 20-foot female, old, experienced, and always hungry. She had learned to follow the scent of waste near boats, a tactic that often led to easy feeding. Tonight, however, what she found wasn't chum or discarded bones, but the churning limbs and splashing silhouettes of humans that triggered her primal hunting instincts. The first strike was fast and silent. A young man named Tommy, still laughing, was yanked under with no warning, his legs shredded before he could scream. Blood exploded on the surface, and one swimmer turned just in time to see his friend vanish beneath the foam. Panic didn't come instantly. Not everyone saw it. But when the shark returned, slamming into another swimmer from below and dragging her under in a bloom of red, the screaming began. Zanelle was on the platform when she heard the shouts and saw the red stains spreading in the water. At first, she didn't understand what she was seeing. Then another body surfaced, motionless, torn, and with a missing leg, and everything shattered into chaos. People in the water flailed and screamed, trying to swim back to the floating club, but the panic only added to the shark's frenzy. The great white circled back again, charging into the cluster of terrified swimmers with immense force, jaws wide. A man tried to climb onto a floating inflatable tied near the edge, but the shark hit it from below, knocking him back into the water before tearing into his torso. His cries were swallowed by the sound of thrashing and screams. Another girl, only a few feet from the platform, was pulled under by her waist, her arms reaching up before disappearing into darkness. Kieran dove in without thinking, trying to help someone who had been struck, a woman clinging to a piece of foam. But before he could reach her, the shark surged up from beneath and ripped her from the surface, her scream cut off in an instant. Blood and foam sprayed across his face as he froze, legs kicking blindly as he turned and tried to swim back. Above, staff threw ropes and flotation devices, some grabbing wildly at the few who reached the edge. Zanelle and another guest helped pull one man up who was missing part of his arm, his eyes wide and empty with shock. Another woman clung to the steps but couldn't lift herself. As someone reached for her hand, the shark slammed into her side, dragging her back down, leaving only a trail of blood as a reminder she had ever been there. In just minutes, the water had turned from playful to predatory, a swirling red nightmare filled with limbs, bodies, and desperate cries. The shark had entered a frenzy now, attacking anything that moved, responding to the sounds, splashes, and scent of blood with terrifying precision. A pair of swimmers, still holding hands, tried to stay still, barely moving as they drifted toward a lifebuoy. But the shark struck again, severing one in half with a single bite and throwing the other into a state of frozen horror. Some survivors made it back, pulling themselves onto the club's edge as others helped them. Many were severely wounded, bleeding heavily, some missing limbs, others trembling and vomiting as they collapsed onto the deck. The music had long stopped. The once cheering crowd had turned into a screaming, chaotic mess as people huddled together, unable to understand what had happened. The shark, after a few final passes, disappeared back into the deep, leaving behind 10 dead and several severely injured. Blood slicked the water, spreading around the anchored boat, and silence finally began to settle over the stunned survivors. Emergency services arrived hours later after the nightclub's captain finally got a signal out. Rescue boats and medics pulled up with searchlights cutting through the dark sea. Divers recovered bodies where they could, though several were only partial remains. Survivors were rushed to hospitals, treated for shock, blood loss, and trauma. Authorities cordoned off the area and began reviewing the nightclub's safety measures, focusing on the disposal of waste and the reckless encouragement of nighttime swimming in open water. Investigators confirmed that fish remains had likely drawn in the shark, and that the conditions had made the swimmers easy prey. Survivors gave statements, their words broken, and many were unable to speak more than a few sentences without trembling or breaking down. Zanelli told them she couldn't forget the sight of a woman being pulled under just feet from safety. Kieran kept replaying the moment the shark erupted from the deep, jaws wide, body thrashing, and dragging another life into the sea. Officials labeled the event a tragic accident but emphasized the need for new protocols. In the following days, the nightclub suspended operations, and locals held candlelight vigils for those lost. Photos of the victims, smiling, joyful, unaware of what the night would bring, circulated in morning posts. The sea, calm once again, gave no trace of the horror it had hosted that night. But for those who had been there, the memory of blood in the water, of screams swallowed by the waves, and of death rising from the deep would never leave them. The sun hung high above the Pacific, casting a golden sheen across the calm waters near Santa Cruz, California. A warm front had pushed in unusual ocean temperatures, and the waves were small and glassy, perfect for a leisurely afternoon on the water. 32-year-old Mia Daniels, a seasoned yoga instructor and lifelong ocean lover, was gliding smoothly across the surface on her stand-up paddleboard. She had launched from a familiar cove just south of Steamer Lane, a spot she knew well where she often came for tranquility and balance. Mia's board sliced through the stillness as she shifted her weight with precision, her bare feet gripping the deck, her paddle sweeping gently through the water. Beneath her, the sea was unusually clear. Sunlight filtered through to reveal streaks of kelp swaying slowly in the depths. She was unaware that something larger and predatory was moving silently below the surface, rising from the darker blue like a shadow with a mind of its own. 15 feet long, with rows of teeth glinting in the fading light, the great white had likely been drawn close to shore by the warm currents and the scattered presence of sea lions. It had been circling just beneath the thermocline, watching, waiting, its massive frame undetected in the shallows. Then, in a sudden burst of instinct and speed, it surged upward with terrifying force. Without warning, the surface exploded beneath Mia. The board jerked violently as a massive weight slammed into it from below. The shark's jaws clamped down across the rear third of the paddleboard, its head and upper body breaching the water in a single, shocking eruption. Mia was thrown sideways, her paddle flung from her hands, as the board cracked with the sound of splitting fiberglass. Water rushed over her head as she hit the sea, limbs flailing, the cold slamming into her chest like a shockwave. Underwater, she caught a flash of gray and white, the bulk of the shark turning below her. Her foot struck something rough and powerful, the animal's flank, just before it twisted and released the board, sinking back into the depths. Mia surfaced with a gasp, blood already spreading from deep lacerations on her left thigh. Pain radiated from the wound, sharp and hot, and panic set in as she realized the board was half destroyed, floating unevenly nearby, bobbing like driftwood. She kicked hard, desperate to stay above the waterline, her injured leg sending pulses of agony through her with each movement. From the shore, the surfers closest to her had seen the impact, a burst of white water and the unmistakable shape of a great white. Several paddled in her direction, shouting for help, though their voices were lost over the waves. One surfer reached her first, tossing her his longboard and helping her straddle it, her blood trailing behind them in streaks as others closed the distance. Mia clung to the board, breath shallow, heart racing, every muscle tight with fear that the shark would return. She scanned the water constantly, flinching at every flicker of movement below. The seconds felt like hours, but the shark didn't strike again. Still, they all knew it might. They paddled together, moving fast toward shore, guiding the leaking woman across the swells as her blood painted the ocean behind them. On the sand, paramedics rushed to meet them. Mia was lifted onto a stretcher, her leg bandaged tightly as blood soaked through the gauze. She drifted in and out of consciousness, her body trembling from blood loss and shock. The wounds were deep, muscle torn, skin shredded, but the femoral artery had been narrowly missed. Doctors later said she was lucky, a few inches in either direction, and she wouldn't have made it to shore. The community responded with a mix of awe and horror. Shark attacks weren't unheard of in Northern California, but this was different. a broad daylight assault just a few hundred yards off a popular beach, with no seals in sight and no signs of struggle beforehand. Marine biologists pointed to rising sea temperatures, which had pulled baitfish and larger predators closer to the coast. The shark's behavior, they said, might have been a case of mistaken identity or a defensive reaction triggered by confusion and heat stress. Mia spent weeks recovering, her legs stitched and stapled in places, her muscles bruised and weakened. The scars would stay with her, both on her skin and in her mind. She found herself flinching at sudden movements, haunted by the split-second moment when the sea beneath her had erupted into chaos. But she also refused to let the fear keep her from the ocean entirely. She returned to the beach slowly, first just to sit and watch, then later to wade in at ankle depth. Friends and students gathered to support her, stunned by her survival and inspired by her refusal to stay away. She spoke often about the fragility of control, how quickly serenity could collapse into danger, and how little warning nature sometimes gave. The shattered paddleboard was never repaired. Mia kept the pieces, storing them in her garage like relics from a different life. Her paddle was recovered days later, floating near a kelp bed with teeth marks visible in the shaft. She hung it on her studio wall, not as a warning, but as a reminder of the sea's power, of her own will to survive, and of the quiet strength that had carried her through panic, blood, and pain. The shark was never seen again, though surfers and swimmers remained cautious for weeks. Lifeguards set new rules, warning paddlers not to venture too far alone. But the water still called to many, as it always had. For Mia, the ocean wasn't just a place of peace anymore. It was a place of memory, risk, and resilience. She would always feel the weight of those jaws below her, the sudden drag toward the deep, and the desperate fight to reach the light again. The sun hung low over a peaceful stretch of the California coastline, casting long reflections across the calm, glassy surf. The cove, known mostly to locals, rarely saw crowds, especially on weekday afternoons. It was a place where the sea met the sand gently, the waves barely lapping at the feet of beachgoers who wandered the shallows. Among them was 27-year-old Emma Lewis, a wildlife photography student spending her summer break visiting lesser-known beaches and exploring marine life along the coast. She had always admired ocean creatures from afar, quiet, observant, respectful of their space, until that one strange day when curiosity overrode caution. Emma had been walking along the shoreline barefoot, camera dangling from her shoulder, when she noticed something unusual in the water just a few feet ahead. A massive shadow shifted beneath the surface, barely disturbed by the incoming tide. At first, she assumed it was a dolphin or perhaps a seal resting in the shallows. But as she crept closer, squinting through the water's glare, she realized the shape was larger and more angular. The broad snout, the heavy body, and the visible dorsal fin identified it unmistakably. A great white shark, unusually close to shore and perfectly still. It was over 10 feet long, lying half submerged in the waist-deep water, its tail gently stirring sand as it breathed. Emma hesitated. No one else seemed to notice it. A few sunbathers were farther up the beach, talking and eating, unaware of the massive predator resting in their midst. She knew sharks sometimes entered shallow water, but this close, this still, it looked peaceful, almost asleep. Driven by awe and what she would later admit was a reckless impulse, Emma waded slowly into the water, careful not to make sudden movements. Her camera stayed slung and untouched, forgotten in the heat of the moment. She moved closer, step by deliberate step, water rising to her thighs as the shark's massive shape became clearer. It didn't move. It didn't even seem to notice her. She raised her hand slowly and reached out, fingers shaking as they neared the shark's skin. She touched it. The skin felt rough and firm beneath her fingertips, cool and textured like sandpaper stretched over steel. For one brief second, she felt only wonder. Then the shark moved. With terrifying speed, the great white twisted in the water, its head surging upward in a sudden arc, jaws parting in a flash of pale muscle and black eyes. Emma barely saw it coming. The shark's snout broke the surface, and in one explosive motion, it clamped down on her forearm with tremendous force. Her scream was instant and sharp, drowned partially by the splash and the crash of her fall. The pain was immediate, sharp, tearing, hot, and she felt the immense pressure crush into her bones before the shark let go. It wasn't a full bite, more of a warning snap, but it had torn through skin and muscle, leaving her arm ripped and blood pouring into the surf. Emma thrashed in panic, pushing against the sand with her good arm as the water turned pink around her. The shark, perhaps startled or confused, didn't pursue. Instead, it turned slowly and swam back into deeper water, its tail moving methodically, fading into the blue as though nothing had happened. On the beach, people had noticed the commotion. A group of beachgoers rushed toward her as she stumbled out of the surf, clutching her arm, face pale and mouth trembling. Blood dripped down her fingertips, mixing with the salt and foam as her legs gave out in the wet sand. Someone wrapped a towel around her arm, others called for help, and within minutes a rescue unit was on its way. At the hospital, doctors cleaned and stitched the deep gashes, stabilizing her quickly. The shark had narrowly missed critical arteries, and despite the torn tendons and muscle damage, she would regain most function in the arm. The bite was brutal but not life-threatening. Emma had been lucky. If the shark had fully committed to the attack or if it had pulled her farther into the water, the outcome might have been fatal. Marine experts later reviewed the incident, piecing together the behavior. They explained that the shark may have been resting in the shallows after feeding or was disoriented, possibly due to changing currents or water temperature. Her touch may have startled it, or worse, it may have mistaken her hand for the flailing movement of injured prey. Either way, they emphasized one clear point. Sharks are wild, unpredictable apex predators, and approaching one, even in shallow, seemingly calm water, was dangerously irresponsible. Emma admitted her mistake plainly and called for stronger public awareness about respecting ocean wildlife. Her case reignited debate over how humans engage with large marine predators. Some criticized her actions harshly, calling it a textbook example of why uninformed interaction could end in tragedy. Others sympathized, seeing it as a stark reminder of the line between awe and recklessness. The beach where it happened was closed for 2 days as officials monitored the waters. No further shark sightings were reported that week, and signs were posted warning of recent incidents. Life eventually returned to normal, but the story lingered. A surreal encounter turned into a painful lesson, preserved in scars and memories. Emma continued her studies, her arm wrapped in bandages and her focus sharper than ever. She no longer dreamed of touching wild predators, nor did she seek the thrill of being close to them. Her fascination with sharks remained, but it had matured into something more thoughtful, rooted in deep respect and the humbling knowledge of how fast beauty can become danger. And in the surf, just beneath the quiet waves, the great white moved on, silent, powerful, untamed, forever part of a story that began with a single step too close.